The galaxy had a word for humanity long before it had a reason to fear them, and that word, translated imperfectly into human language, meant something between unstable, irrational, and fundamentally broken. It appeared in first contact briefings as a warning footnote buried beneath more serious threats: expansionist hive minds, ancient machine intelligences, empire builders who consumed stars the way lesser species consumed fuel. Humans were not listed among those dangers. They were cataloged instead as a contradiction, a species that fought itself constantly, divided by borders it invented, ideologies it could not agree on, histories it could not let go of. A species that poisoned its own world, then argued about whether the poison was real. A species that reached space not because it was unified, but because competition forced innovation faster than cooperation ever had. Galactic psychologists studied humanity with detached curiosity, fascinated by how a civilization so chaotic had not yet destroyed itself entirely. Military analysts dismissed them outright. They lack cohesion, the report said. They lack patience. They lack emotional regulation. In sustained conflict, they would fracture. And so, when humanity finally stepped onto the galactic stage, not as conquerors, not as invaders, but as newcomers asking cautious questions, the galaxy smiled politely and quietly labeled them insane. Not insane in the way of berserkers or mindless killers, but in a subtler, more damning way. Humans reacted too strongly to loss, remembered their dead too vividly, and carried emotional scars forward instead of letting them fade into abstraction. Where other species treated war as a tool of policy, humans treated it as trauma. Where others calculated acceptable losses, humans mourned individuals. Where others surrendered when the cost-benefit curve turned unfavorable, humans sometimes fought harder simply because retreat felt wrong. To the galaxy, this was madness. War, after all, was supposed to be clean, civilized, governed by ancient conventions refined over millions of years of interstellar conflict. Fleets would posture, firepower would be demonstrated, and the weaker side would concede before true annihilation became necessary. It was efficient, predictable, orderly. Humanity did not fit into this model, and so the galaxy assumed, fatally, that humans would eventually be corrected by it. The first test came quietly, the way most disasters do. A minor border incident near an unremarkable system, claimed by a regional power that had protected lesser species for centuries. Human survey vessels entered the system legally, according to treaties humanity had not even been present to sign. The regional commander issued a warning. Humanity apologized and began withdrawal. The galaxy nodded approvingly. See, unstable, yes, but ultimately compliant. Then one human ship malfunctioned. Engines failed. A rescue request was transmitted, polite, urgent, frightened in a way alien ears found uncomfortable. The regional commander, operating under doctrines older than human civilization itself, made a calculation. One disabled ship was an inconvenience. Destroying it would send a message. A single, precise shot was fired. The human vessel shattered. No survivors. The galaxy expected protests, demands, maybe sanctions. What it did not expect was silence. For 3 days, humanity said nothing. No transmissions, no threats, no outrage broadcast across subspace. Analysts relaxed. Some even laughed. See, they said, all noise, no spine. On the 4th day, humanity spoke, not with words, but with motion. Fleets that had never been observed leaving Earth's space emerged from hidden shipyards and deep space staging zones the galaxy had never detected. Not massive armadas meant to intimidate, but balanced formations designed for endurance. Logistics ships moved first, medical vessels followed, then came the warships, angular, scarred, built not for beauty but for survival. The galaxy noticed something strange immediately. Human fleets did not broadcast challenges. They did not issue ultimatums. They did not posture. They moved with quiet purpose, like a body reacting to pain before the mind fully understands it. When contact was made with the regional power's border fleet, the humans did not open fire. They transmitted data, names, crew manifests, final messages sent to families. The transmission ended with a single line, spoken calmly, almost gently. "This loss has been acknowledged." The regional commander was confused, then irritated. Losses were statistics. A ship was a ship. This is how the galaxy worked. He responded with doctrine, demanding withdrawal and asserting authority. Humanity did not reply. They advanced. Not recklessly, not chaotically. They advanced the way a species advances when it has rehearsed this moment in nightmares for centuries. The first shots fired by humanity were not aimed at weapons or engines. They targeted command nodes, communication relays, and power distribution systems. Alien ships found themselves blind and deaf within seconds, their crews alive but isolated, unable to coordinate. Boarding craft followed, not the ceremonial, limited boarding actions the galaxy was accustomed to, but relentless insertion teams trained for environments where rescue was impossible and surrender was uncertain. Humans fought differently. They did not break formation when wounded. They did not abandon positions when commanders fell. Every soldier seemed to understand not just their role, but the intent behind it. To alien observers, it looked like improvisation. In reality, it was adaptation, something humans had practiced since their earliest wars, back when every battle had been fought with imperfect information and worse odds. When the regional fleet collapsed, the galaxy expected humanity to stop. The message had been sent, a life had been avenged, balance restored. Instead, humanity kept going. Not outward, not conquering territory, but inward, deeper into the regional power's military infrastructure. Shipyards were disabled, weapons stockpiles were seized or destroyed. Not a single civilian target was touched, not because humans were incapable, but because they were deliberate. This, more than anything, unsettled the galaxy. Insane species did not show restraint. Yet here was humanity, precise and controlled, escalating with terrifying clarity of purpose. The regional power finally sued for peace, invoking ancient laws and emergency protocols. Humanity agreed to talks immediately. The galaxy relaxed again, telling itself a comforting story. This had been an outlier, an emotional overreaction. Humans would learn. Then one human delegation arrived. Not diplomats in flowing garments or symbolic colors, but officers, veterans, individuals whose service records were etched with losses rather than victories. They listened, they did not interrupt, and when it was their turn to speak, they did not demand territory, tribute, or status. They demanded one thing only: acknowledgement. The destroyed ship would be remembered. The crew's names would be recorded in galactic archives. The doctrine that treated acceptable losses as abstractions would be revised. When the regional representatives balked, humanity did something unprecedented. They withdrew from negotiations, and then, calmly, methodically, they resumed operations. Not in anger, not in vengeance, in enforcement. It was in that moment, the moment that the galaxy realized that humanity did not need to hate you to destroy your ability to harm them, that the label insane began to crack. Because insanity implied chaos, humanity was not chaotic. Humanity was focused. They carried the weight of every war they had ever fought, every mistake they had ever made, and instead of forgetting it, as the galaxy had learned to do, they had built their future around remembering. And as fleets across known space watched the regional power dismantled piece by piece, not through annihilation, but through systematic neutralization, a new, deeply uncomfortable question began to circulate in classified channels and emergency councils alike. What happens if a species that remembers every war decides it has learned enough?
The galaxy did not panic immediately after the regional power fell, and in hindsight, that delay would be studied as one of the greatest collective misjudgments in recorded history. Panic would have implied confusion, fear, and disorder. What the galaxy felt instead was something far more dangerous: confidence built on habit. For millions of years, interstellar civilization had followed patterns so stable they were mistaken for laws of nature. Rising species tested borders, established powers responded, losses were absorbed, treaties were signed, equilibrium returned. Humanity, the councils believed, had simply taken its first violent step into maturity. They would now be folded into the existing system, their aggression tempered by diplomacy, their emotional volatility smoothed over by protocol. Analysts reassured nervous delegates that humans had already peaked, that the destruction of a single regional fleet represented the outer edge of their capabilities, a dramatic but ultimately limited display. After all, human space was small. Their population, while large by local standards, was insignificant on a galactic scale. Their technology was advanced, yes, but hardly miraculous. What truly unnerved observers was not what humanity had, but how they used it. Human fleets began appearing far from their borders, not in acts of conquest, but as observers, escorts, and, most troublingly, interveners. They arrived unannounced at conflicts already in progress, inserting themselves between aggressor and victim with no preamble. They did not negotiate first. They did not ask permission. They simply transmitted a statement that would become infamous across the stars. Stand down. This conflict has exceeded acceptable harm thresholds. To the galaxy, this was absurd. Acceptable harm thresholds were defined by councils, not by newcomers. When ancient empires protested, humanity responded with evidence: population displacement curves, casualty projections, ecological collapse models, presented with clinical precision. Humans did not argue morality in abstract terms, they argued outcomes. And when protests turned into threats, humanity did not escalate rhetorically, they acted. Fleets were disabled in hours, supply lines vanished overnight. Generals woke to find their forces surrounded by ships that had slipped past defenses thought to be impenetrable. Always the same pattern, always the same restraint. No planets burned, no species erased, just power removed. Slowly, reluctantly, the galaxy began to notice something unsettling. Humanity was enforcing rules no one had ever successfully enforced before. Not because the rules were new, but because the galaxy had grown comfortable ignoring them. Prohibitions against civilian targeting, against ecological warfare, against genocidal containment strategies quietly rebranded as population management. These laws had existed for ages, honored in ceremony and violated in practice. Humanity treated them differently. To humans, rules were not symbolic, they were promises, and promises, once broken often enough, had consequences. Alien strategists struggled to predict human behavior because humans did not optimize for dominance, they optimized for prevention. This was a mindset forged on a world where extinction had always felt close, through nuclear fire, engineered disease, environmental collapse, and wars fought not for territory, but for identity. Humanity had survived not by being the strongest, but by learning what failure looked like and backing away from it at the last possible moment. The galaxy mistook that history for weakness. In truth, it had created a species uniquely sensitive to warning signs others ignored. When intelligence reports surfaced of a coalition of old empires quietly preparing a joint military exercise near human-influenced space, humanity responded with unnerving calm. No threats were issued, no counter-exercises announced.
Instead, human envoys released classified analyses into public channels, exposing decades of covert abuses, suppressed revolts, and erased cultures tied to those very empires. The galaxy reeled. Information warfare was not new, but using truth itself as a weapon, without embellishment or propaganda, was devastating. When the coalition accused humanity of destabilization, a human admiral responded with words that would echo through military academies for generations. Stability built on silence is not stability. It is a pause before collapse. The coalition proceeded anyway. Fleets mobilized, lines were crossed, and this time humanity did not wait for a first shot. They struck preemptively. Not against populations, not against homeworlds, but against the concept of centralized command. In a matter of hours, the coalition's combined fleets found themselves cut off from leadership, their hierarchies shattered by precision strikes against command vessels, data cores, and strategic AI systems. Individual ships remained operational, their crews alive and armed, but directionless. Then humanity did something no one expected. They broadcast instructions, clear, calm guidance on how to stand down safely, how to surrender without loss of life, how to disengage without shame. Many crews complied. Some did not. Those that resisted were neutralized swiftly, almost gently, as if humanity regretted the necessity even as it carried it out. The war never received a formal name, because from the human perspective, it was not a war. It was an intervention. And that distinction terrified the galaxy more than any declaration ever could. Because wars ended, interventions continued as long as the conditions that caused them remained. Across the stars, militaries began rewriting doctrines, not to defeat humanity, but to avoid attracting its attention. Expansion slowed. Suppression campaigns quietly ceased. Entire strategies built on plausible deniability were abandoned because humanity had demonstrated that it did not need permission to act, only justification. Philosophers debated whether humanity was becoming the galaxy's police force, its judge, or its executioner. Humans themselves rejected all three labels. In internal communications later leaked, one sentence appeared again and again. We are buying time. Time for younger species to grow without being crushed. Time for old powers to adapt without collapsing violently. Time for the galaxy to learn restraint before learning extinction. Yet beneath this measured strategy lay something far more emotional, something humanity never fully acknowledged in public. Every intervention was a message to their own past. Every fleet deployment was an answer to a history filled with "if only we had acted sooner." The galaxy saw efficiency. Humans felt responsibility. And slowly, uneasily, the label insane evolved into something worse, something more dangerous. Humanity was no longer dismissed as unstable. They were feared as a species that had suffered, learned, and decided that survival, real survival, meant never allowing the same mistakes to repeat on a larger scale. And somewhere deep in the oldest archives of galactic history, a suppressed warning resurfaced, written long before humans ever reached the stars. Beware civilizations that remember their pain. They do not seek revenge, they seek prevention.
The moment the galaxy finally understood what humanity truly was did not arrive during a battle, nor during a council vote, nor even during one of humanity's interventions. It arrived quietly, almost invisibly, during a crisis no one else believed could be stopped. Beyond the mapped edges of known space, something ancient stirred, an intelligence older than recorded civilization, drifting between galaxies, consuming stellar systems not out of malice, but out of instinct. Entire regions went dark without warning. Exploration probes vanished. Refugee streams collapsed into static before they could transmit coordinates. The galaxy responded the way it always had, by arguing about jurisdiction, by debating whether the threat fell within existing treaties, by calculating the cost of mobilization versus the probability of survival. Humanity did not wait for consensus. Human deep space sensors had been watching the anomaly for years, not because they feared it, but because it matched patterns they had learned to recognize on their own world: runaway systems, feedback loops without fail-safes, disasters no one believed until it was too late. When the first confirmed extinction wave was detected, humanity moved everything. Fleets recalled from intervention zones, shipyards converted overnight from deterrence platforms into evacuation arcs and frontline warships. Civilian industries were repurposed without hesitation, not by force but by agreement, because humanity understood something the galaxy still struggled to accept. Survival was not an individual effort, it was collective or it was nothing. As the ancient entity advanced, devouring stars and bending space around itself, galactic defenses failed one by one. Weapons designed to intimidate civilizations did nothing against something that did not think in terms of victory or defeat. Entire armadas vanished in moments, their loss recorded only as silence. And then humanity arrived. Not in a single grand fleet, but in layers: scouts, engineers, soldiers, scientists working as one organism. They did not attempt to destroy the entity outright. Instead, they studied it mid-conflict, adapting in real time, sacrificing ships to gather data, lives to buy seconds of understanding. Alien observers watched in horror and awe as human commanders issued orders that would have been considered unthinkable: calculated losses, planned retreats into lethal zones, entire squadrons sent knowingly into annihilation so others could learn. This, the galaxy realized too late, was why humans had been called insane. Not because they lacked fear, but because fear did not paralyze them. Humanity had learned on Earth that survival sometimes required choosing how you would lose so that you could eventually win. The countermeasure humanity developed was not elegant, it was not clean, it was brutally effective. By exploiting the entity's consumption mechanics, humans triggered a controlled collapse, feeding it carefully engineered energy signatures until it destabilized itself, tearing its own structure apart across folded dimensions. The blast was visible across half the galaxy, a silent storm of collapsing light. When it was over, nothing remained: no debris, no corpse, just empty space where extinction had been certain. Humanity did not celebrate. They buried their dead. They archived the data. They returned the borrowed resources. In the aftermath, as surviving species tried to comprehend what had happened, the Galactic Council issued a statement unlike any before it. It did not praise humanity. It did not thank them. It admitted fear. "We do not understand you," the statement read, "but we acknowledge that without you, none of us would still exist." The human response was brief: understanding is optional, responsibility is not. From that moment on, the galaxy changed, not because humanity ruled it, but because everyone else adjusted their behavior around the reality of humanity's presence. New civilizations were no longer rushed into exploitation. Wars were reconsidered before they began. Power was still wielded, but more carefully, because somewhere out there, beyond borders and politics, there existed a species that would intervene not for glory, not for territory, not for ideology, but because they refused to watch the same mistakes destroy a larger world. Humans returned to Earth, to their fractured nations and imperfect societies, still arguing, still struggling, still far from united. The galaxy never understood how a species so internally divided could act with such terrifying unity when it mattered. Humans did not see a contradiction. They had always been this way: messy in peace, relentless in crisis. And in the end, that was the truth the galaxy finally accepted.
Humanity was not insane. Insanity was repeating the same cycle of destruction and expecting survival. Humanity had broken that cycle once on a small, fragile world called Earth, and when the galaxy faced its reckoning, humanity simply did what it had always done. They stood between extinction and everyone else and said, "Not this time."